I got it. Got it. Hang on, hang on. Hang on. Shh. I got it. Here's a new card idea. Get ready for this one. I'm out there on this one. You make a card. It's Pot of Greed. But you know what else? It's Change of Heart. Yeah? And you know you know what else? Forceful Sentry. Yeah, just give it some stupid activation condition too. Like, oh, if your opponent like hand traps you, like, whatever. Let's see what they do with that. They're gonna lose it. They're not gonna know what to do. We'll ban it in a few months, whatever, but they're gonna buy it anyway. Just do it. Let's see what happens. Oh, new card came out. Let's see it. And now to take a big sip of water. What's going on, guys? It's Simo. So today I'm bringing to you a video on what I believe is probably going to be the most broken card of 2020, 3 Tactical Talents. I don't know what Konami was smoking when they came up with this one, but oh boy, did I want to bring you guys a video on this card today. This card just got announced for the new set Rise of the Duelist, which comes out after Eternity Code. You know, granted, we're not still all under quarantine by that point, but in any case, there is so much to talk about with this card that I had to bring you guys this video today. So, for those of you who don't know, 3 Tactical Talents is a normal spell card with an effect that reads as follows. If your opponent has activated a monster effect previously during your main phase this turn, activate one of these effects. Either draw 2 cards, take control of 1 monster your opponent controls until the end phase, or look at your opponent's hand, also shuffle 1 card from their hand into the deck, and you can only activate 1 3 Tactical Talents per turn. Yeah, we now took Pot of Greed, the Forceful Sentry, and Change of Heart, and made them all have an orgy with one another and manifested this abomination. Again, I don't know who thought this card was okay, but let's go ahead and talk about it. So there is a condition on this card, right? Now clearly, like, it's not just like, you know, Pot of Greed or Change of Heart or Forceful Sentry. Your opponent does have to activate a monster effect before this card is able to be activated. But is that even really a condition? Like, yeah, there are going to be some instances where your opponent won't activate a monster effect, but you have to think about how common it is to see hand traps being used against you in pretty much every single game of Yu-Gi-Oh! I mean, how ubiquitous have hand traps become? Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Psyframe Gear Gamma, DD Crow, Nibiru, like, I could go on. There are an infinite number of hand traps that have been played since, like, the dawn of hand traps' existence, and if your opponent activates any one of them, they effectively get punished for activating it, because now you can use this card and either Pot of Greed for yourself, take something your opponent controls, or look at their hand and shuffle something back into the deck. Like, that is absurd. These cards are all banned for a reason individually, and so you're saying now because you're allowed to just use any of them because your opponent activates a monster effect? I do not think that is okay in the slightest. Let's talk about the worst of the 2 examples, and that would be going first. Because if you go first, arguably this card isn't that great, because if your opponent doesn't have any hand traps to use against you, you're effectively playing a dead card in your deck. But the upside that this card provides, I don't think warrants people not playing this in their main deck, just because even if they want to go first, this card is still insanely busted. Let me just go ahead and give you an example. So let's say, for instance, you're playing any sort of combo deck and you play like your first starter card and that gets hit by your opponent's Ash Blossom. Well, 3 Tactical Talents is now online. You slap that down, and while, oh no, you can't Change of Heart your opponent, guess what you can do? You can either draw 2 cards, which means you now have the potential to draw into more of your combo extenders, or you have the potential to Forceful Sentry your opponent, which is arguably better than Pot of Greed. And the reason why I say that is because not only do you get to shuffle a card back out of your opponent's hand into their deck, but you get to get the knowledge of all of the cards that are in their hand, which means that if you are playing a combo deck, not only can you get rid of any other hand traps they may have to stop your play, but you also are now aware if they have multiple, because you can only shuffle back 1, one, you know which other ones to play around. So if your hand gives you the ability to play around specific hand traps, you now have all the knowledge to be able to do that. So if they have something like a Nibiru, well, now you're not going to play into Nibiru, or you're just going to shuffle Nibiru back into the deck anyway and just make it completely irrelevant. This card is crazy. And don't even get me started about going second when it comes to this card, because this card gets even better because then the Change of Heart effect is active. And what's even more absurd is that this isn't just Change of Heart. This is Change of Heart that doesn't target. Yeah, if you read the text closely enough, it just says take control of one monster your opponent controls. So if your opponent has like 2 monsters and you slap this down, assuming they've activated a monster effect that turn, even if they have a way to get rid of one of their monsters through whatever means, you can just take the other one. So even it doesn't even matter because it doesn't target. So it makes it this incredibly powerful going second card, because in addition to everything else that exists, think of cards like Lightning Storm or Evenly Matched. The biggest downsides of these cards is that they are pretty much only good if you're going second, and you're pretty much playing a blind second strategy if you are opting to main deck these cards. This card doesn't care, because whether you're going first or second, this card has such vast amounts of utility depending on whatever deck that you're playing, that it allows you to use it in whatever way that you wish. And I think that is like the biggest part when it comes down to this card, is that it is generic. And I love seeing incredibly powerful generic cards, because that means every deck can use them. It's not tied to a particular archetype. There's no like Burning Abyss 3 tactical talents, you know? You can use it in whatever deck that you're playing for the most part, and I think that's incredible that pretty much all decks are going to have access to this. Now, is that necessarily a good thing? We don't know yet. We don't know how unhealthy this card might be, because this card effectively punishes people for using hand traps, and that's arguably one of the downsides of this card. Because take a moment and think about this. Let's say you know that 3 tactical talents currently exist in the competitive metagame. And let's say your opponent's going first, they're comboing off, and you have a hand trap in your hand. Well, you're in a bit of a precarious position here, because yes, you have that hand trap, albeit an Ash Blossom or a Nibiru, whatever it may be, and you have the opportunity to use it. If that resolves and goes through, then okay, then that seems pretty good. You might have stopped your opponent's plays. You don't know if they have an extender or anything like 3 tactical talents in their hand, but you could feel pretty good for that split second that you made the correct play. Or they're gonna punish you entirely by 3 tactical talents in you, either drawing 2 more cards, which again, if they're playing combo, they're probably gonna draw into whatever they need anyway, or they're gonna Forceful Sentry you, rip out another good card in your hand, whether it's another hand trap or it's one of your deck's best cards, to ensure that you don't have it. So you're now starting on 3 cards, 4 when you go to draw, and they're gonna still get to combo off anyway. How is that exactly healthy? This creates a very questionable dynamic in the game, and I am very curious to see where the game goes once this card gets released. Now, another downside is, yes, your opponent does have to activate a monster effect, but if we're talking about competitive Yu-Gi-Oh here, monsters are the most used type out of all cards in the game. Some decks are comprised almost entirely of monsters and like no spells and traps, because monster effects have proven to be some of, if not the most powerful effects in the game. So as a result of that, yes, there may be like 1 or 2 games you come across where this card actually doesn't do anything, because they might be playing more of like a trap heavy deck, and in those instances, then, you know, you may not be able to use this card at all. But even so, even if you're going up against like control decks still play hand traps. Like take Salamangreat, right? Like Salamangreat, yes, you can use this if your opponent uses Gazelle during your turn, but you can also use it if they use Ash Blossom or any of the other hand traps that that deck plays, because typically Salamangreat plays in the neighborhood of like 9 to 12 hand traps because it can afford to. And that's what scares me the most about this card. The fact that this card has so much wider application than people are giving it credit for. It's not like it's a purely going second card. You can confidently put this in your going first deck, and again, there's going to be a few instances where it may be dead, but in the long term, this card is going to pay off in dividends and punish any of your opponents for trying to stop any of your plays. Now, another argument you could make is that during the mid to late game, this card gets arguably worse, because if you're in a grindy situation or both players are very low on resources, this card becomes kind of a dead draw because you have your opponent using a monster effect when you may only have like 2 or 3 cards to each of your names, and that might be a bit to ask for in those situations. But again, depending on the type of deck that you're playing, if you're playing a combo deck, your deck is already so feast or famine anyway that you're just looking to close the game out before the mid game even occurs whatsoever. If you're playing a control deck, this is going to help propel you forward, because if your opponent uses an Ash Blossom, or if say they like DD Crow you, or if they Gamma you, or what have you, then you're going to be able to recoup the resources that you lost as a result of your opponent using that hand trap. And I think the biggest and probably the most worrisome aspect when it comes to 3 tactical talents, it's going to be expensive. Like, this is probably going to be one of the most expensive cards we've seen in this game's history in quite some time. And who knows, maybe all of us are hyping this card up, but just instinctively, if you have a card that has access to 3 banned card abilities and has one of the most laughable activation requirements that I've ever seen on a card, I don't think that hype is unjustified. I think this is going to be a format warping card. It is that powerful. This card changes the whole dynamic of how people play hand traps. People are going to be thinking twice and almost psychologically convincing themselves that they're going to lose if they don't use specific cards just because of this card existing in any competitive format. The biggest thing that you have to remember is, I think if you want to get the full value off of 3 tactical talents, is that you need to be playing a deck, as long as it has the ability to have some sort of follow-up play. If its initial play gets stopped, your deck can play this, because if you have a deck that kind of is like a one trick and doesn't do anything after it gets Ash Blossomed, or if it gets hit by Nibiru, then there's really not much point in playing this, right? Arguably, you could say that the Forceful Sentry effect might be able to save you, because you might be able to at least see what your opponent's playing, rip a card out of their hand, and depending on what you rip out, it might be enough to make you survive for a turn or 2. But I think in the long term that your opponent's probably going to be able to capitalize on that more often than not and be able to win, just because the tempo at which decks are able to kill one another is so insanely high that it's difficult, right? So as long as you're playing a deck that has some sort of follow-up, depending on the number of extenders that your deck is playing, so that your deck just doesn't have this one card that is absolute must resolve, otherwise you just lose the game, then this card is for you. And that pretty much means that like 90% of the decks in the game are able to play this, and that's what scares me the most. Again, maybe I'm overhyping it, we'll just have to see, but I definitely think the hype is warranted. So guys, that's gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about 3 tactical talents, because oh boy, things are going to get very interesting post Rise of the Duelist. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.